I'm Fiona, 36 years old. I used to believe that if I stayed quiet and worked hard enough, eventually they would see me, but then my name was crossed out in red ink on the studio's display board, a single, deliberate line not erased, just left there. It's just a name. Don't make it into something it's not, someone said before walking out of the room without looking back. And I understood some places aren't meant for you to hold your ground, but to teach you how to leave. I used to believe that a name once etched deep enough couldn't be erased. The subject line was written in lowercase family anniversary details, June 9th. No punctuation, no warmth. Just a timestamp, like it was sent by a scheduling app rather than my mother. I clicked it anyway. The body of the email was brief, a note from Eleanor about the small but meaningful gathering they were planning this year. Attached were PDFs, a guest list, a menu, and a document titled Budget Allocation. Final. I searched for my name first. Fiona, then Fee. Then just Aldridge. Nothing. Then, again, I had made that mistake before, assuming I'd be there. I opened the guest list and skimmed down the page. There was a column for RSVP status, one for meal preferences. My sister's name appeared twice, once as Sadie Whitlow, and again as the Whitlow family. Even her dog had a row, Luna. Chicken and rice, no onions. I closed the file, reopened it, scanned slower, just to be sure. Then opened the search bar and typed my name. No results. The PDF with the budget was laid out in neat rows. Beside Back Garden Refresh was the note, design originally by Fiona Aldridge, costs covered by Sadie. My fingers didn't move from the trackpad. I just sat there rereading that line. My name reduced to a parenthetical, a footnote under someone else's name. My phone vibrated. Just don't make this about you again, please. The message came from Sadie. No contest, no greeting. A preemptive strike, as if I had already responded. I hadn't. I glanced toward the bookshelf where a photo frame had been turned face down weeks ago. I didn't remember doing it. I just never flipped it back up. The glass had a small crack near the corner, like something had pressed too hard against it for too long. My mother's fridge had a pink ribboned card on it the last time I visited. I remember it not for its decoration, but for what was missing. My name wasn't on it. The names were all there in black Sharpie, under neat headings, appetizers, Sadie drinks, Walter decor. Sadie again. There had been a little smiley face next to her name. Not mine. There was no slot for the person who had designed the garden they were about to decorate. Eleanor had leaned her hip against the counter and looked over her shoulder without turning fully toward me. We're keeping it small this year. Less expectation. That sentence sat in my chest, now colder than the tile she stood on that day. I went back to the email and stared at the date June 9th. My birthday. They had scheduled the event on my birthday. A family anniversary with custom menus, floral themes, and printed invitations on the day I was born. And not one line in the document acknowledged the overlap. Not even a mistaken Fiona. Confirmed. In the silence of the room, I thought about how easy it is to vanish without force. All it takes is repetition. Omit someone often enough, and soon it looks deliberate. And when it looks deliberate, no one questions it anymore. It just becomes assumed. The screen dimmed slightly from inactivity. I touched the trackpad, not because I needed to, just to remind myself I was still part of the system. I opened the last attachment, a map of the backyard layout with labeled areas, seating area, lighting path stage. I recognized the blueprint. I had drawn it 3 summers ago on tracing paper, kneeling beside my drafting board, with pencil marks still visible where I had adjusted the slope of the walkway for better drainage. My initials were gone. The legend now read, Design Concept, adapted by Whitlow Events. My name had been lifted from the design, but my hand still lived in the curves of the walkways. Like a ghost no one wants to admit still walks the halls. I moved the cursor over the reply button, then let it rest there, not pressing. Across the table, the metal badge with Founder, Aldridge Studio, engraved in brushed nickel, lay face down. It had a small scratch on the corner, a sliver of wear from years of moving desk to desk. I hadn't touched it in weeks, maybe months. I used to carry it between meetings like a shield clipped just above the breast pocket. Now it lay motionless, catching nothing. My phone vibrated again. A follow-up. They just want peace, Vi. Don't ruin it. Please. That word, peace, used like a curtain to hide a locked door. I leaned back, resting my fingers lightly on the edge of the laptop. The silence in the room wasn't heavy. It just didn't move. I didn't respond, didn't forward the email to Jenna, didn't call Walter, didn't check the weather for June 9th. I closed the window and then the laptop and left the message unread. Sometimes the absence isn't a mistake. It's a message. Some people wait for permission to arrive. I used to wait for permission to remain. I remember the string lights at Sadie's wedding looped along the trellis I had designed by hand. I stayed up 2 nights, correcting the proportions so the arch wouldn't collapse under weight or wind. I built the floral backdrop in our studio's basement alone, while she posted online polls asking her followers to choose between peonies or roses. Neither made it to the final arrangement. She stood smiling before it anyway, and no one asked who built it. At the reception, Walter raised a glass. To the couple, and to Sadie, for making everything around her beautiful. The microphone caught the clink of champagne flutes. I stood near the bar, where the edges of the room blur, and names aren't always needed. That night, I took home the leftover eucalyptus branches and wove them into a small wreath. I hung it on my apartment door until it dried and crumbled at the edges. During Eleanor's treatment, I drove to their house every Thursday and Sunday. I cooked meals in batches, labeled them with masking tape, dated the lids in permanent marker. I wiped the counters, replaced the filters, fixed the crooked drawer they had ignored for years. 3 weeks in, Sadie brought over a bag of deli sandwiches, each wrapped in brown paper with custom wax seals. Eleanor smiled as she pulled one out. Sadie always knows how to bring comfort. The fridge had 3 full shelves of my food behind her. I didn't mention it. Later, when I emptied the recycling bin, I found my containers still unopened. I once apologized after a fight that hadn't started from me. Sadie stormed out of the room because I suggested a vendor wasn't trustworthy. She returned an hour later with red eyes and a clipped tone. You always make things so difficult, Fee. I handed her a glass of water and said it softly. I'm sorry. She didn't answer, just drank, nodded once, and turned the TV back on. I told myself peace mattered more than being right. The thought sounded wiser than it felt. Colton used to give me a half smile after family dinners, the kind that implied more than it revealed. Don't push so hard. They're not like you. He meant it as guidance, maybe even care. I took it as instruction. I started folding myself around conversations, trimming details, softening edges. I left my success at the doorway, mentioned projects without numbers, changed topics when someone's expression turned neutral. At one gathering, someone asked where I had been traveling. I had just returned from a design tour through Copenhagen and Madrid. I replied, just work. Nothing major. Sadie chimed in. You always make it sound like you're too busy to breathe. Eleanor chuckled. That's Fiona for you, always chasing something. I placed my fork down and folded my napkin, slowly counting to 5 before picking it back up. On the back porch, there's a table covered in a knitted throw. It's faded now, with pooled threads and a stain that never washed out. I recognize the pattern, moss-stitch, blue-grey yarn, the kind that softens after wear. I made it for Eleanor during my first year of grad school. I never saw it used indoors. They bring it out for events now. It covers the folding table that holds plastic cutlery and condiments. I saw a photo of it recently in a social media post. Sadie had captioned it Mom's Backyard Vibe. The throw was beneath a stack of disposable napkins. There's an old family photo in the hallway at my parents' house, framed in uneven cedar. I remember the day it was taken. I was 17, still in braces. We had gone apple picking. I stood at the edge of the group because Sadie had insisted on standing next to both parents. In the print, my shoulder is cropped just past the seam of my sleeve. I look like I wandered into someone else's memory and forgot to leave. During my last visit, I stood quietly in front of that frame. Eleanor passed behind me. That photo's always been one of my favorites. I didn't correct her. I just nodded and moved toward the kitchen. I had once written letters, sent flowers, booked dinners on anniversaries they forgot to mention. I kept invitations open even when I wasn't sure I'd be included. Now I look at blank cards with hesitation. Today I picked one from a drawer. Pale green, understated. I wrote a simple birthday message inside, addressed to Eleanor. No flourish. No apologies. Just a single line written in my smallest script. I folded the card, placed it in an envelope, and set it beside the fruit bowl. I didn't seal it. I didn't reach for a stamp. It's not that I didn't try. I just stopped showing the effort. Some absences don't echo. They just settle quietly, steadily, until the room learns to shape itself around them. The day Aldridge Studio opened the ribbon was taut too crisp, as if trying not to remember what it had once held together. I remember holding the scissors slightly off-center so the cut wouldn't appear staged in photographs. The camera flash reflected off the steel. I turned instinctively, scanning the crowd, not for applause, but for someone not clapping. Colton wasn't there. I'd known he wouldn't be, but part of me still waited for a delay, an excuse, a breath. Eleanor stood near the refreshment table in a cream blazer, her sunglasses still tucked into the collar despite the overcast. It's not really his kind of thing. She didn't mean it cruelly. She didn't need to. A week earlier, Form Function ran a feature on my studio, 4 pages of clean lines, thoughtful text, and a closing quote they pulled from a call I'd done in the middle of sanding a prototype design isn't about being seen. It's about what holds everything up. I printed 2 copies. I mailed one to the house. 2 days later, Walter texted me a photo. Sadie grinning behind a floral installation at some event, holding a drink with a rose petal garnish. Your sister's got that natural creative spark. Runs in the family. No mention of the article. Or the feature, or the quote. I stared at the image until the garnish began to blur. At the next dinner, I arrived just after 7. A client emergency had pushed everything back, and I sent a text on the way, no reply. When I walked in, the dining room was half cleared, and laughter was coming from the kitchen. Plates stacked in the sink wine nearly gone. The folding chair was still in the hallway closet, so I leaned against the counter. Sadie tapped the side of her glass. "You should have told us you were joining!" Walter didn't look up. "You're the one always somewhere else." Eleanor opened the fridge. There might be something left. The plastic wrap on the last piece of quiche hadn't sealed completely. I ate it cold over the sink. Later that night, I found a covered bowl labeled Luna, no onions. Their dog had a designated portion. I didn't. It wasn't always intentional. That's what I told myself. Once I saw a group photo on Sadie's feed, my parents' cousins, a few family friends gathered around a campfire. She had captioned it, "Just the Aldridges." The light made everyone look soft, familiar, complete. When I asked Eleanor about it weeks later, she took a sip of her tea and said, "You wouldn't have enjoyed that kind of trip. It was a silent retreat." I had been the one to send her to her first one after her surgery. I remembered how she held the envelope then, as if I knew it was really for her. In their garage, beneath boxes labelled autumn Christmas glass and old cords, I once found a small package with a faded sticky note. My name was written in Walter's block print. The tape had yellowed. I opened it carefully, like it might break under the air. Inside was a hardcover book on personal branding. Not new. Inside the flap, "To Sadie, keep building your empire. So proud of you." MP. The author had been a speaker at one of her conferences. There was no second inscription, no signature from Walter, no note to me. I rewrapped the book and placed it back in the same box. I didn't ask about it. The kitchen shelf had 3 mugs, each different. One with a bear in a suit, one with vines and initials, one with gold foil script, "Boss Babe." There was no mug for me. I checked the dishwasher, the cabinet above the sink, the bottom drawer. I even checked the trash absurdly. Nothing. Colton, noticing me holding the bear mug, once said, "They're used to the version of you that doesn't need things." He passed me his own cup that morning. "You can use this. I'll grab another." There was a crack along the handle sealed with tape. I held it with both hands. When the studio celebrated its 5th year, the photographer asked if I had a personal item to include in the shoot, something symbolic. I brought a small brass knife I had used in my first architectural model initials, etched into the blade, F.A. The photographer placed it gently near the edge of the table set up. During the final layout, the knife was cropped. A sliver of the handle remained out of focus. My name didn't appear in the credit. The piece read, "Aldridge Studio continues its rise, shaped by a collective vision." That evening, I returned to my home office and placed the print on the shelf, facing outward. I stood in front of it for a while, then turned it face down. The sound was soft, final. There was an old voicemail from Sadie I used to replay when I doubted myself. "You always take things too personally. It's not that deep, Fi." That phrase became a refrain. Whenever I paused too long before responding, whenever I asked to clarify an oversight, whenever I sent a reminder that was met with silence. On a shelf in my hallway, I kept a glass paperweight with a dried orchid inside. It was once part of a bouquet they gave Sadie when she won a small business award. I had been the one to nominate her. She never knew. The orchid stayed frozen in resin color, preserved but roots invisible. In my studio, there was a team photo taken the day we reached our first $1 million in revenue. Everyone wore navy. I had forgotten to bring a change of clothes and wore charcoal. In the framed version Colton printed, he had adjusted the hues digitally, blending my blazer to match the rest. Now, we look like one unit. I don't think he noticed what disappeared in the edit. My silhouette softened, my neckline blurred slightly. I looked like someone standing behind the real group. There's a kind of forgetting that isn't born from cruelty. It's born from convenience. A version of you they can ignore without guilt because they've trained themselves not to expect your shape in the room. Tonight, I passed by the shelf in my workroom where a family photo still sat in its original frame. We were standing in a garden, Sadie at the center, arms looped around both our parents. I stood to the far side, half shadowed by a tree. I turned the photo face down, not out of anger, just to clear the surface. Some families don't forget you. They just never looked long enough to remember you were there. I used to think you had to be gone for someone to replace you. The headline wasn't centered. The spacing above the byline was off by a hair, which I noticed before anything else. That's how my brain works, structure before meaning. But then my eyes landed on the words, Colton Aldridge, leads Aldridge Studio into a new era. Rachel sent the scan without a message, just the image perfectly cropped like she knew I wouldn't need explanation. The article described me as having stepped away to focus on mental clarity and personal renewal. There was a paragraph about transitions followed by a quote from Colton Fiona's legacy is foundational. I'm honored to continue what she began. The last sentence, a new logo, new partnerships, and a redefined direction mark the start of the Marks Aldridge signature series. I zoomed in on the logo. My line work, tight, low contrast curves from an old sketch I did on a train to Chicago, reinterpreted into something sleeker, sterile. The tail of the A was flattened. They'd taken the breath out of it. I opened the project folders I kept for Harrington Hotel. All the rendering schedules correspondence. My initials had been on every document. Now, new versions had replaced the originals. The files had new metadata. Owner C. Aldridge, consultant J. Marks. I opened the storage drawer in my desk. The hard copies were still there, carefully sorted in dated sleeves. My signature in black ink, consistent. But those weren't the ones the client had received. The email from Julian Marks arrived at 4:17 p.m. Appreciate the handoff. Colton's been great to work with. Excited to evolve the design. There was no mention of me. No thanks, no nod, not even a courtesy copy. I checked the client's website. The press release named Colton as principal designer. I read the paragraph twice, then again. My name appeared once in the footer under historical contributors. I stared at the screen until the light shifted, turning the white space slightly grey. My reflection hovered incomplete. I called him. Why is my name removed from every contract? His voice was level, unhurried. Fiona, you've been unstable lately. We all agreed it's better this way. There was a pause, measured. Then, it's not personal. It's about keeping momentum. I didn't respond. I only hung up. That was momentum enough. The next day I opened my fireproof safe. Inside was the binder with my original registration for the studio notarized documents tax filings. The folder looked untouched, but when I flipped through the pages I noticed inconsistencies, paperweight font, shift alignment just slightly wrong. Someone had reprinted the originals. Not scans, reprints. The ink on the page where my signature should have been was too clean, too centered. I had always signed with a slight left slant. These signatures had none. They weren't forged with malice. They were forged with precision. There was a box of presentation boards in my closet samples I kept for lectures, internships, once even a museum bid. I pulled one from the middle, a hand-rendered elevation of Harrington's atrium. My name had been covered with a translucent label. Beneath the plastic faintly visible in pencil was my original monogram. Someone had pressed a red line through it. Not a scribble. A single stroke, sharp and deliberate. Red ink, not black. Not erased, just overwritten. I turned the board toward the window and let the sun find the pencil beneath. My name was still there, diminished, but present. I remembered a conversation months earlier at a dinner Colton arranged with Julian. Julian's team wants to consolidate identity, he had said. Streamline. Vision, one voice. It's cleaner for the narrative. I had nodded then, not understanding. In a notepad tucked inside the second drawer of my desk, I had once written a line for myself during a slow evening at the office. Design is never neutral. It either honors the hand that drew it, or it buries it. I hadn't looked at that notebook in weeks. The silence that followed all this wasn't shocking. It was precise. No one called, no one checked, no one explained. Because it had been decided quietly that I wouldn't be part of the explanation. My name still appeared on some older materials. A few news archives, a plaque in the lobby, a URL redirect that hadn't been cleaned. But everything active, everything moving forward, it all belonged to someone else. The company I built no longer needed the person who built it. Only her outline. On my desk was a leather account ledger I used to track independent contracts. The last line written was dated 4 months ago. I flipped it open not to add anything, just to see the handwriting. I ran my finger along the edge of the column where I had once used green ink to mark fulfilled payments. The pen was still in the drawer, capped untouched. I clicked it open and closed. Once. Twice. Then set it down beside the old founder nameplate. The corners of the metal had dulled with time. The back had residue from where it used to be pinned to a corkboard. No one had ever taken it away. I had just stopped carrying it. There were no arguments, no slammed doors, just a slow layering of decisions made elsewhere behind polished doors over coffee cups I didn't pour. They didn't shout to remove me. They wrote a new story around me. One that sounded reasonable enough to pass. Colton's voice still echoed, carefully curated. It's not personal. As if that made it neutral. I reached for a paperweight I'd kept since grad school, a glass dome with a small copper wire bent inside, forming the letter F. It was slightly off-center. A professor once pointed that out during a studio critique. You'll either correct that or build a career from it. I never corrected it. The weight of the glass sat comfortably in my palm. The metal inside had darkened over time, no longer bright, but still intact. I placed it beside the ledger. I didn't cry. I didn't write an email. I didn't tell anyone. I just closed the notebook, pressed my hand flat against the cover, and waited until the pressure steadied. They didn't just want the work. They wanted the story that came with it. Some endings don't sound like anything. They just stop where silence starts to feel like air. The forms were already drafted when Jenna arrived. I hadn't asked her to prepare them. I think she just knew. She placed them on the table without commentary. The ink on her pen didn't even hesitate. Everything was there, my resignation from public-facing duties, the proxy transfer of administrative tasks, the legal redirect of all mail to her office. Across the table, she asked the question I expected. Do you want me to draft a statement? I shook my head once. No. Let the silence speak first. She didn't argue. She just tapped her pen against the edge of the file and began sorting things into envelopes. The studio didn't need a press release to mark my absence. It had been practicing for it. Every design meeting that started without me, every contract signed by someone else, every edit made to my initials. The work had already adjusted to my outline. I didn't pack the office myself. Jenna arranged for 2 interns to deliver the essentials. My sketchbook's personal effects, a folder marked original concepts that I had labelled in my handwriting years ago. The only thing I kept in my hand was the original door key brass with a chipped black cap. I left it on the conference table, centered under the pendant light I once sourced from a ceramicist in Oregon. No one stopped me. No one followed. The hallway didn't echo. At home, The suitcases stayed half open for a day and a half. I didn't fill them all the way. I only marked the items I intended to take. On the dining table, I left a typed list for Colton. It wasn't accusatory. It was alphabetical. It included 4 ceramic bowls, 2 chairs I had refinished myself, and 1 photograph of the studio's construction taken before the walls were painted when the wiring still showed like veins. There was no mention of books or bedding or art. I didn't want anything that had lived too long in shared air. I opened the safe in our bedroom one last time. My documents were gone, already transferred to Jenna's custody, but one thing remained. A wedding card I had once taped to the back panel marked, "To my forever." I had left it there as a kind of promise to myself, not for what it said, but for what I believed when I wrote it. I took a pencil from the drawer, 1 line drawn lightly through the middle. Not a strike, just a separation. The card stayed behind. In the windowsill above the radiator sat a ceramic vase, off-white, uneven glaze, a faint spiral near the neck. Sadie had given it to me for my 33rd birthday. I remember her handing it to me in a white bag with gold rope handles, saying, "I figured you could use something to soften the corners." There was a hairline crack down the side now. It hadn't broken, but if I pressed a finger to the seam, it widened slightly, just enough to catch light. I left it on the sill. There was no message, no final conversation. I didn't ask Colton to be there. I didn't wait for him to come back. He likely noticed only the empty hooks near the door and the space on the desk where my notebooks used to be. The air in the apartment remained the same. Clean, structured, designed to feel expensive but unburdened. I had chosen warm LEDs for every light switch calibrated to adjust with the hour. I knew exactly how the evening light would slant across the hardwood and fall on the navy trim. It had taken me 3 tries to get it right. I stood in the center of that room, the one I once shaped to hold 2 people's ambition, and looked toward the floor. There were no scuffs, no marks, just the careful precision of surfaces that had been kept presentable. Jenna called once more later that afternoon. "Everything's confirmed. Mail is redirected. All requests will go through me." I thanked her and didn't ask for anything else. Colton didn't call. He didn't text. I wasn't surprised. He had always been fluent in omission. It wasn't a silence born of shame. It was the kind he expected others to normalize. I had learned to read between what wasn't said long before this. When I locked the apartment behind me, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The walls wouldn't shift. The doors would close exactly as designed. There would be no sound, no drama, just the soft alignment of hinges settling into place. I stayed that night in a small short-term rental. 1 lamp, 1 chair, no decoration. The kind of space meant to hold only transition, nothing permanent. I slept on top of the blanket with my coat still folded at the foot of the bed. In the morning, I made tea in a chipped mug I found in the cabinet. No gold leaf, no logo. I looked at the steam rising and thought of nothing in particular. It wasn't emptiness. It was just the absence of something needing to be proven. There was no need to tell anyone I had left. The people who needed to know already did. The ones who didn't would notice eventually when their messages went unanswered, or when the seating arrangements shifted slightly and no one adjusted them back. I used to think that silence was a deficit, that not responding meant losing something. Now I know it can be a structure, a frame, a shape that lets everything else become clear. I didn't sign a letter to mark the end. I didn't remove my name from the blueprints. I didn't send a final email titled "Moving On." I didn't post. I didn't explain. Some people measure departure by volume. I chose something quieter. I didn't slam the door. I let it close slowly so they could hear it. Some silences feel heavier than noise ever did. The apartment came with a key that stuck slightly in the lock, as if the door wasn't used to new hands. There were no rugs, no curtains. The walls were a soft grey, not painted that way, just faded over time. It smelled faintly of dust and something like paper. Not unpleasant. Just honest. I brought one bag. Inside it, a notebook, a sweater that still held the scent of bergamot from a drawer I no longer opened, and a single glass cup. The cup had my name etched on it in a script I didn't choose. It was a gift from a company holiday party, passed out like trophies for participation. Everyone had one. Mine had a tiny air bubble at the base that always made the water inside tilt slightly. I placed it on the windowsill. The afternoon light hit it in a way that made the etching disappear. That felt right. I didn't bring the framed certificates. I didn't bring the composite renderings or the award engraved with my former title. I didn't bring anything that needed polishing. The apartment had 3 pieces of furniture, a bamboo desk, a chair with one uneven leg, and a shelf that leaned slightly to the left. I kept them exactly where they were. I didn't rearrange anything. I didn't wipe the shelf. Each morning I filled the cup with warm water and dropped in a tea bag, mint no label bought loose from a place that didn't take cards. I drank it in silence. No phone, no inbox, no noise. Just the sound of the window, creaking when the wind shifted. The desk was smooth, untouched. No pen grooves, no coffee rings, no post-its stuck in corners with talks in all caps. I slid my hand across it as if I were reading something that hadn't been written yet. The lavender sprig I had carried for weeks lay beside the bed. I didn't press it between pages or tie it with string. I just placed it there, stem and all. It bent slightly to one side like it didn't mind. On the 3rd day, a neighbour knocked. He was middle-aged, wore socks with sandals and held a basket of oranges. The last girl left them. I figured they shouldn't go to waste. I nodded and accepted them. The skin was soft on one, starting to give in at the base. I peeled it later, sitting on the floor. The juice ran down my wrist, but I didn't get up to wipe it. I kept the peel in the sink until morning. Jenna called again. "We're still holding everything. No one's asked where you are." That wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. I didn't reply. Colton hadn't called. Not once. I imagined his voice anyway. Calm. Calculated. The kind that rehearses empathy but edits out its pauses. You always needed space. I gave you that. When I had first told him I wanted to leave, he hadn't looked up. "Just make it easy, Fiona. Don't make a scene." I didn't. My mother had sent a message short and sharp. Whatever this is, don't expect it to mean anything to the rest of us. She was good at reducing things, even people. Sadie, as expected, had sent a voice note. I didn't open it. Her voice always arrived dressed like concern and left like dismissal. She would have said something like, "I hope this makes you feel whatever you need to feel," which is how she said, "You're exhausting." I didn't delete the message, I just let it slide down the notification list until it vanished. One night, I sat at the desk and opened a new notebook. The pages were thick, unlined, the kind that resisted pens with hesitation. I chose a black ink pen not for symbolism, but because it didn't bleed through. I didn't write anything at first, just uncapped the pen, then capped it again. I thought of the email folders I used to sort pending urgent for review. I used to think organizing meant control. Now, I understood it was just a way to slow the collapse. The notebook stayed open for hours. Not blank, just unwritten in. The next morning, I passed by a mirror in the hallway. I didn't look. I used to check my expression in every reflective surface, shop windows, elevator doors, the back of my phone. Not out of vanity, but to make sure I was holding the version of myself that people preferred, the agreeable kind, the one who blinked at the right moments. Now I wasn't sure what version was left, and I wasn't in a hurry to find out. I ate simply. Bread, fruit, tea. I didn't cook. I didn't clean beyond necessity. I moved slowly, not out of fatigue but precision. I noticed the way the floor shifted when I walked too close to the wall. I liked the honesty of that. Nothing pretending to be new. Sometimes at night, I imagined the apartment breathing around me, settling, groaning slightly. Not protesting, just remembering it had space again. The lavender began to curl inward. The color faded from violet to something that looked like memory. I didn't move it. I started keeping the windows open even when it was cold. The air wasn't kind, but it was clear. One afternoon, I laid the notebook flat on the desk and wrote one sentence carefully. No more spaces designed for others. This one is mine. I didn't write anything after that. I just closed the cover, placed the pen beside it, and let the room return to quiet. Some apologies arrived dressed as strategy. The email subject read, "Let's talk as sisters." It was formatted in bold. There was no greeting, just paragraphs about press cycles and staying ahead of narratives. Sadie's tone was sweetened but not softened. There's talk, not just online. I've had clients reach out. Some have paused collaborations. You know how sensitive wellness brands are to instability. She wrote instability like it was an allergy, not a story. I think it would be best for all of us, especially for Mom and Dad, if we clarified that things aren't fractured. Maybe we do a joint statement. Something simple. We don't have to get personal. I didn't reply. Not right away. I read the message twice, let it sit for hours unopened again, then read it a third time, just to feel the artificial curve of her concern. Near the end, she added, "This isn't about blame, it's about optics." I marked that line. It didn't sting. It didn't even scrape. It just confirmed what I already knew. Her reach was longer than her memory. The next day, an envelope arrived. Heavy paper. Too formal for a gesture, too crisp for a mistake. It wasn't from Colton, not directly. His name was printed in the footer of the letterhead. The letter was from their legal team, professional, almost sterile. Proposal for mutual benefit and reputational closure. Reallocation of public ownership language. Request for courtesy in final statements moving forward. At the bottom, one line italicized, "This has gone far enough. Let's be civil." There was no space for breath between the lines. My name appeared twice. Each time it was framed in past tense. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't mark it. I didn't shred it. I just gave it silence. 3 days later, my phone rang. A video call. I hadn't seen the caller ID in weeks. I answered anyway. My parents filled the screen seated in the same formal living room they used for birthdays and apology dinners that never quite arrived. Eleanor wore pearls I recognized from her second wedding. Walter held a mug, though he never drank from it. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "We thought it was time." Walter cleared his throat. "The neighbors are asking questions. You know how they talk." I said nothing. My reflection hovered in the bottom corner of the screen. I looked still, but not settled. Eleanor adjusted a decorative bowl behind her. Sadie's had to answer for a lot lately. Her sponsors are nervous. This is affecting more than just you. Walter chimed in like punctuation. You've made it difficult for the family to maintain balance. I lowered the phone slightly, just enough to see the edge of the ceiling instead of their eyes. Eleanor's voice thinned. We just want everyone to be okay again. That's not unreasonable. I clicked the screen off. That evening, a friend forwarded me a link. No message. Just the headline, Aldridge Studio co-founder resurfaces at quiet exhibit. The photo showed me standing beside an installation in a borrowed gallery. The lighting was uneven. My arms were folded. I hadn't known there were cameras. Colton had already shared the article. The caption on his professional page read, "Proud to see her healing. We remain supportive." Supportive. There was no tag, no context, no acknowledgement. Just a polished sentence that made it sound like I had wandered back under their umbrella by choice. I stared at the screen long enough for my reflection to fade into it. Later, I saw a clip from Sadie's interview. Someone had sent it without comment. She was seated under soft lighting, wearing my necklace, silver-curved, gifted years ago. It was the one I had handed to her during a holiday gathering after a fight she had insisted wasn't a big deal. She took it without clasping it, dropping it into her coat pocket like a receipt. It looked too plain for you anyway. Now it sat on her collarbone, steady and deliberate. Her caption, "Family is where we begin and where we return." I watched the interview quietly. The set was blush and white, decorated with wildflowers that looked chosen for fragility. Sadie's voice was level-polished. Fiona's been through a lot. We all have, but our connection is still there, even if she doesn't say it. The host nodded as if that made sense. Some relationships are just quieter. Sadie smiled, modest, composed. It's not about conflict. It's about how we process care. I closed the tab. Later that week, Jenna texted, "They're building a comeback arc around you, just so you know." I didn't respond. Instead, I reopened Sadie's email, the one about grace and unity and how this wasn't about blame. I reread the final paragraph, "You've been distant lately, but we've always made space for you." That word, distant, hung in the air longer than the rest. A rewrite of history so subtle it almost felt fair. Let's not make this messier than it has to be. I think there's still a version of this story where we all come out okay. I hovered over the reply button. My hand rested on the mouse, unmoving. I imagined what I could say. Something sharp, maybe. Something final. But instead I moved the message to archive. Not delete. Archive. Like an exhibit, no longer on display. They want the version of me that stays quiet. That version no longer exists. Growth rarely arrives with announcements. It moves like light does gradually, until one day nothing casts the same shadow. I've started walking before sunrise, not because I have to be somewhere, just because I like the sound of my feet on pavement, before the world decides what kind of day it will be. There's a moment around 5:37 when the sky turns the color of steel just before it softens. I don't check the time. My body knows it. I pass the bakery with its chairs still stacked, the florist untying string from fresh bundles, a boy on a skateboard too fast for the hour. None of them know who I used to be. That feels like safety. In my right hand, the last 2 fingers still stiff from therapy. I've learned to slice apples with my left. My handwriting leans slightly more than it used to, but the lines still hold. I boil water, pour tea, butter toast without spilling. That feels like precision. There's no alarm at 7 anymore. I don't open my phone before standing. The screen stays dark until I've folded my blanket, aired the room, checked the light at the baseboards. When I replied to the email from the Women's Centre, I used my personal address, not the one with my name embedded in the domain, just a simple string of letters, no signature. They didn't ask for a portfolio, just availability and whether I believed in community over branding. We don't need a lead designer, they said. We just need someone who listens. I show up twice a week. I sit with the director in a back room that smells faintly of glue and dried lavender. We sketch quietly. She likes rounded corners and soft earth tones. I never try to make the lines sharper. She once looked at a model I'd drawn on graph paper and tapped her nail against the margin. This doesn't feel like an architect's hand. I smiled. It's not. The mug I use at the center is chipped at the base. I never turn it around. It doesn't cut. When a journalist from one of the national magazines reached out for an exclusive interview, they opened with compliments that felt like scaffolding meant to support something that was already crumbling. I didn't read the entire message. Just enough. I wrote back, I'll speak when I'm not a headline. They replied twice. I didn't open the second one. There's a hook near my door where I keep my keys. Attached is a small silver tag engraved with, "What you keep is yours." Melissa gave it to me months ago. She never made a speech. She just slipped it into a box of old drafting tools she knew I'd use again. I keep it in sight. It helps more than most advice ever did. The design I drew last week wasn't for anyone. I didn't scan it. I didn't title the file. It's just paper now, folded once, sitting beneath a small jar of sea glass. No brief. No pitch. Just curves and lines for their own rhythm. I look at it every morning, but only for a few seconds. I don't need to admire it. I just like knowing it's mine. There's a scratch on the corner of my desk from when I dropped my tea. I didn't sand it. It reminds me that some marks belong. This week, the woman in the apartment next to mine asked if I knew anything about color balance. Her voice was cautious, not nervous. She held up a strip of paint samples. I want something warm, but not too yellow. Everything turns beige when I try. I looked at the samples, then at the light in her living room. I didn't ask what the room was for. I just pointed to one of the cooler tones with a red base. Try this one in morning light. If it glows instead of fading, you've found it. She nodded. You do this professionally? I paused, then smiled. Sometimes. Now and then. I didn't offer a card. I didn't say more. That evening, I boiled lentils and roasted carrots. I ate at the kitchen counter without a podcast, without a screen. I cleaned up with slow hands. The rag left a faint streak on the stovetop. I let it dry that way. When I sat back at my desk, I noticed how quiet it had become, not around me, but within me. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. On the desk, my sketch pad, a small rock I'd pocketed from a beach years ago, and a mug of tea still steaming. No laptop. No reminders. No blinking lights. From the hallway, I heard footsteps pass a child giggling behind a wall. I didn't move to listen closer. It wasn't my sound to hold. When the woman with the paint samples knocked again to thank me, she held a cookie on a napkin. You were right. It looks softer now. I took the cookie. I didn't say much, but I nodded and smiled, not the practiced kind, just a small one. You don't need a firm to make something beautiful. You just need room to be. Some things end with a sound. Others end with a stamp on paper. I watched the clerk's hand move over the form without glancing at me. The ink from her pen left faint trails of blue across boxes that reduced years of my name to 3 short sections. Current name, requested name, reason. I didn't write more than I had to, restoring my maternal lineage. The stamp came down once. No flourish, no acknowledgement, just the soft thud of approval and the slide of the paper back across the counter. I traced my new name with my eyes. Fiona Quinn. A name without their shadow. A name my grandmother once signed at the bottom of every letter she sent me. Careful loops, no wasted strokes. I remember her voice when I told her as a child that I might not belong anywhere. You belong where you decide to stay. She was the only one who never made me feel like I needed permission to exist. At home, I opened the drawer that still held the last remnants of Aldridge Studio, a nameplate with founder etched into dull metal edges slightly worn. A black and white photo from the 10th anniversary party where my face was barely in frame, caught between two taller bodies. A prototype, the very first resin model I'd built by hand, its edges softened by years of dust. I placed each item into a brown box, stacking them with deliberate care, as though arranging a farewell that didn't require an audience. On top of the items, I set a single piece of paper. Do not forward. No explanation. No signature. When Jenna came by that morning, she glanced at the box. Are you sure about leaving it there? You could just keep these. I shook my head. They're already pretending I never touched them. Let them have the weight of what's left. She adjusted the strap of her bag. Do you want me to deliver it? No. I'll go myself. The lobby of Aldridge Studio felt colder than I remembered. The receptionist was new, her hair tied in a tight knot, nails painted a flat grey. She looked up only when I placed the box on the counter. Delivery name. I kept my gaze on the marble surface. It doesn't matter. It belongs here. She hesitated, scanning my face as if searching for recognition. She found none, and I gave her nothing. As I turned to leave, she called out once more, Do you need a receipt? No. There's nothing to confirm. The sliding doors opened slowly, as if reluctant to let me go. I didn't look back. At home, I drafted the last letter I would ever send to Colton and Sadie. The words were few. One single line written in black ink across a clean sheet. Let this be the last time my name appears in your negotiations. I sealed 2 envelopes, one for him, one for her. No return address. Jenna stopped by later to collect them. You're sure this is final? I handed her the envelopes without pause. Final doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be written. She slid them into her briefcase, giving me a look that was more respect than question. There is only one photo on my apartment wall now. A wooden bridge stretching over marshland, the planks uneven but holding. My grandmother had taken me across it once when I was 8. She'd held my hand the whole way. No lectures, no warnings, just the quiet presence of someone who trusted that I could walk and still return. That bridge feels closer to me now than any building I've designed. I made tea that evening and stood in front of the photo, the steam curling against the frame. I didn't think about the studio. I didn't think about Sadie's latest interviews or Colton's posts. I just looked at the grain of the wood, how the boards led forward, without asking for approval. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail official notice of my name change. I held the envelope for a moment, before opening it, fingers pressing against the raised seal. Inside the black letters were stark, Fiona Quinn. I whispered it once under my breath, not to test it, but to feel its weight. Melissa, one of my former staff, texted me later that day. Saw the article about Sadie wearing your necklace again. You okay? I looked at her message for a full minute before typing, I'm fine. I'm not that necklace anymore. I didn't wait for her response. The words were enough. That afternoon I unfolded the paper map I'd bought from a second-hand shop. It smelled faintly of ink and dust. There near the coastline was a town I'd only heard mentioned once. I circled it lightly, in pencil, the mark faint enough to erase, but dark enough to guide me. I traced the roads leading there, narrow and curved, almost shy. I imagined walking across that small town, no one calling my name because no one knew it yet. It didn't feel like running. It felt like stepping forward. I left the brown box at the studio. I signed the name change papers. I sent the last letters. None of it felt like an ending. It felt like turning a page that had already been folded for too long. I'm not walking away. I'm walking toward. Sometimes stillness doesn't feel like quiet. It feels like being exactly where nothing has to be explained. The kettle whistles, but not sharply. It's the soft kind of whistle one that fades into the rhythm of morning, not interrupts it. I take it off the stove and pour the water into a clay mug, one that doesn't match anything else in the house. There's a small chip near the handle, smoothed over by time. It fits my fingers the way a stone fits a palm, used but right. I stir in the mint leaves with a spoon that's slightly bent at the neck. The cabinet creaks when I close it. I don't mind the sound. It reminds me I'm somewhere older than everything I used to chase. Outside the window there's a lone pine tree, weathered. Its left side leans slightly from the last storm, branches sparse near the top. It doesn't reach upward anymore. It holds. That's enough. On the kitchen table, a local newspaper rests beside my sketchbook. The paper is folded unread. The sketchbook is open to a half-finished drawing, an outline of a women's wellness center. No grand entrance. No skyline competition. Just low walls, natural light, curved walkways that suggest patience, not prestige. I wrote a line above the drawing days ago before I knew what the shape would be. Build only what breathes. I haven't touched the sketch since, but I leave it open anyway. Some ideas don't need to be rushed. They just need to be allowed. The house smells faintly of salt and wood. I don't like candles anymore. I let the breeze carry whatever it carries. The curtains sway even when the windows are closed like they remember wind. There's no alarm clock here. I wake when the light changes. No meetings, no metrics, no calls with agendas labeled clarity. No one asks for my opinion in the language of extraction. When Melissa's email arrived last night, I didn't open it immediately. The subject line was gentle, thoughts on your name for the advisory board. I read it this morning with both hands wrapped around the mug. Her tone was kind, steady. There's room if you want it. Just your insight, nothing public. You wouldn't have to speak unless it felt right. I haven't responded. Not because I'm unsure, but because silence now feels more deliberate than response. I've kept exactly 3 things from my old life. First, my grandmother's sketching pen. The metal has worn smooth along one side where her thumb rested. I hold it sometimes, but rarely use it. It's not a tool anymore. It's memory in motionless form. Second, a sprig of lavender pressed flat inside the back cover of a book I haven't opened in months. The color has faded to almost grey. But the scent, soft herbal, emerges every time I turn the page behind it. Third, a torn piece of foil no larger than a playing card. On it, a note I wrote to myself at 22, the year I thought everything depended on being seen. One day, this will matter. Until then, keep steady. I still don't know what this is, but I know what steady means now. It isn't immobility. It's moving without asking for applause. The porch steps are weathered, painted once in a pale blue that has now dulled into driftwood grey. I sit on the middle step each morning just after the sun moves from the treetops to the edge of the house. It lands right where I need it. The cup is warm in my hand. My thumb presses against the ceramic just where the glaze has cracked a tiny fracture formed after I dropped it once weeks ago. I didn't throw it away. It still holds heat. I hear someone walking past the front gate, slow and careful. A man from town, maybe the one who owns the hardware store, nods as he goes. You're the quiet one who moved in near the ridge. That's me. He tips his hat. Good morning for light. I nod again. They usually are. The conversation ends there, and that's enough. No one here asks where I came from. They ask where I shop for fish, whether I prefer sea salt or rock salt. If I've been to the used bookstore that sells more shells than novels, their questions don't excavate, they plant. There's no mirror in the hallway anymore, just a coat hook and a small shelf with stones I've picked up on morning walks. Flat ones, slightly curved, nothing shiny, nothing labelled. Today I'll hang the drawing on the wall, not in a frame just taped at the corners like I used to do in school. The wall isn't white, it's the colour of sand when it's dry. The drawing will fit there, not to impress, just to stay. The colour palette for the centre is pinned beside it, earthstone, rough fibre. No chrome, no polished marble, nothing that tries to shout in boardrooms. The design isn't built to convince anyone of my value. It's just built to hold others in their quiet. At the bottom of the email from Melissa, she wrote, "You don't have to say yes, but it's yours if you want it." I reread that line, then minimize the window. I don't need to answer right away. My worth doesn't live in anyone's inbox. The porch boards creak beneath me. A sea breeze shifts the steam from my cup. My thumbnail presses into the side of the mug, the same thumb that once broke clean in a fall. No one expected me to survive. It healed. Not perfectly, but functionally. I bring the cup to my lips slowly. The tea isn't hot anymore, but it still carries warmth. That's all I need from it. There's no one left to explain myself to. No more rooms where I have to earn the right to stay. Only air. Only the open window. Only breath. They once tried to erase me from the picture. I simply learned how to live beyond the frame.